But sometimes precedent is wrong. So let me give you a classic example of someone that involved a Supreme Court justice from Kentucky. The case was Plessy versus Ferguson. The dissenter was John Marshall Harlan from Kentucky, who went to Centre College, was appointed to the Supreme Court by Rutherford B. Hayes in 1877 and served until 1911. And John Marshall Harlan said that was a violation of the 14th Amendment and also a violation of a civil rights bill that had been passed by the Congress that was largely ignored. 58 years later, the Supreme Court in Brown versus Board of Education basically adopted Harlan's dissenting opinion, and it became 9-0, the law of the land, bringing down racial segregation in public education. So I raise that just to make the point that precedent is important, but sometimes the precedent is outdated or wrong.
Relevant me for so all that jumbling from Mitch McConnell there is actually running defense. The one thing you may have heard from some trigger words from all that mumbling and grumbling was talking about Roe versus Wade, also Plessy Ferguson and Brown versus Board of Education. Again, pointing out this precedent of overturning a Supreme Court decision after 50 years or more. That's basically you could get from this, from his speech there. But the thing is, when we're talking about Brown versus Board of Education, Plessy versus Ferguson, I'm like, man, why is Mitch McConnell talking about this? There's a reason, because over the weekend, his buddy, the guy that he put into this bipartisan gun control legislation to talk about, John Cornyn tweeted this out. Now do Plessy versus Ferguson and Brown versus Board of Education. That's in response to Barack Obama, who was in response to the Roe versus Wade decision being overturned, tweeting out, today, the Supreme Court not only reversed nearly 50 years of precedent, it relegated the most intensely personal decision someone can make to the whims of politicians and ideologues, attacking the essential freedoms of millions of Americans. Don't forget what Obama tweeted there, and in comparison to what Cornyn tweeted in response, because that's where the difference of this whole thing goes down. So people took John Cornyn's tweet there to say, oh, he's in favor of actually Plessy Ferguson, is upset that Brown versus Board of Education changed that legal argument and those actions that led to this desegregation in general, and also the separate but equal clause and thoughts that they had about the Constitution. That was his point, but it looked pretty bad. So because it looked so bad, John Cornyn also said this in response once the fallout happened. Well, thank goodness some SCOTUS precedents are overruled. And that's in response to his other tweet where he was catching hell. So anytime you have to clarify yourself and say, no, actually, I'm not advocating in favor of the racist decisions that we've had in our history. I'm not actually responding and saying, hey, how about we overturn and flip back Brown versus Board of Education, go back to Plessy Ferguson. I think your tweets might want to need a couple of revisions before you send them out.
That is just high comedy. This idea of like actually no, I meant the exact opposite of the thing that I was trying to snarkily say is funny. And Mitch McConnell, man, continues to be probably the most cynical politician of my lifetime. Like I can't remember a guy who was a bigger opportunist and just cold-blooded, cynical politician. Like it doesn't get any worse than Mitch McConnell. And the problem is that I don't think a base of his party is in agreement with him. I think the idea is like, yeah, let's get rid of Reading. Let's get rid of like the interracial marriage thing. Let's get rid of interracial public schools. Let's get rid of all of it. We got the 6-3. Let's bring these cases and just roll back every single precedent that moved in the direction of equal rights and racial equality and things of that nature. And that's Mitch McConnell's problem, is that his base and his supporters, and it's funny because he's always serving two masters, right? He understands that the base support of his power is Republican voters, right wingers, some of which are like crazy, deranged people, and the business interests. And this is bad for business. This is bad for business. Like the overwhelming majority of people are not in favor of this decision. Not that they themselves want to get abortions or do abortions themselves, but most people think if you want to, you should be able to do it safely, right? And so that's why it's always interesting to watch Mitch McConnell and his juggling act, because he has the base and he has his corporate daddies that he has to serve.
I love that point, because that's the thing. We've seen a lot of times when it comes to corporate entities and ones that buy out these politicians, they actually don't care a lot of times about these fights, these culture war fights. What they care about is convincing enough people to have these culture war fights to support the candidates that also support their money interests. It all goes back to that. They actually don't care if anyone actually has a right to their own reproductive decisions.
Of course, they're rich. They could always get their mistresses and daughters to get abortions whenever they need to.